Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am joined by my colleagues and friends Alexandra and Whitney to break down the astrology of November. It is a really big month with a lot of intense astrology. We've got a new moon in Scorpio with Mars opposite Pluto to start the month. We have Pluto moving into Aquarius as the month moves on, Mercury turning retrograde at the end of the month. So a lot to unpack. I'm really excited to be chatting again with Alexandra and Whitney today. Also, be sure that you check out the horoscopes that Alex and Dana and myself did. Another angle on some of the major transits of the month, looking at the whole sign house placement in your chart. So that might be useful for all of you, as well as some other coverage that I'm doing this week on the Mars-Pluto opposition. So yeah, a lot of good content to come. It's interesting that all of this is happening also right before a major political election, obviously, here in the United States. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack. Before we get into it, as always, remember to like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 80,000 subscribers. That's our next milestone that we hope to achieve by the spring equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you for everybody who has subscribed over the past couple of months. You've doubled our monthly average. It's been a really awesome thing to see. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. One promotion for today, and that is the upcoming Year 1 program. Before we dive into horoscopes, check out the courses page on the website. First year course starts on November 16th. It's coming up now. It's a great election with Pluto moving into Aquarius to start your study under. At the bottom, you'll find enrollment options. And in any of the other videos that you watch this week, except for horoscopes and monthly overview, you will find an additional informational video about the program tagged on to the end of our normal content for the week. So you can check that out to learn more about it. There is need-based tuition assistance as well. So all the way up until the start of the program, if you're someone who'd like to take it but is living on a limited or fixed income or experiencing financial hardship, maybe you're a single parent or you're on disability or retirement, a fixed income, we get it. So we want to make sure that astrology is accessible for people. So please check out that option if it would help you. And on that note, I am very excited to bring Alexandra and Whitney back. Hey guys.
Hey.
How are you guys doing?
We're doing all right.
Yeah. How was October? We had an eclipse and it was a wild month. What's been up for you guys?
Yeah, it's been a crazy month. I started moving in September and I'm still not done. We just moved our last box like 2 days ago. Just living in Box City, moving with the baby is not the most fun thing I've done.
Was your move, Whitney, in August?
Mine was in August. So okay. Yes, lots of transition here.
They say that moving is like one of the most stressful life events for human beings. And you would think with all the excitement that's often, I mean, sometimes you don't want to move, but a lot of times people are consciously choosing to move and they're excited about it. And yet it is so stressful.
I'm just like, I lived in New York for a while. So I was used to just like, well, if it doesn't fit in 2 suitcases that I can carry on the subway, I don't own it. So this is like a very different, I'm in my 30s now. I have a child, I have a family. So we have to like box things up. It was a whole new surprising journey for me.
Right.
Yeah,
that's wild. I remember in New York City, my experience of being there for 3 years was that I also moved a lot just because apartment situations changed and roommates changed and it was the whole thing.
I think I counted, and throughout my late teens and probably to about 30, I moved like 17 times.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Wow.
16 years.
Yeah. Yes. It was like one of the things that I remember someone asked me is like, what is one thing that you really want to do differently from what your parents did in the way you raise your kids? And I was like, well, that's a huge question, but the very first thing that came to my mind, this was just, a kind of casual conversation. And I was like, not move as much, because we moved a lot as a family. And, I mean, not that there's anything wrong. I'm not judging anyone who has to move. I mean, sometimes you have to move, but, I do feel like one of the things that was most stressful for me as a kid growing up was moving tons and tons of times. That was just hard. There's a lot of Mars and Cancer in the air this month because of the start of the month with a new moon in Scorpio, with being ruled by Mars in Cancer, and the potential for displacement emotionally, the feeling of like the nest being disturbed, or just that more vulnerable space around home and family is front and center with the fallen moon and the mutual reception with Mars and Cancer and stuff like that. So I've been thinking also a lot about how many stories I've heard over the past month from people, clients, students, people around me in my life about that Mars and Cancer and how it's been showing up for everyone. It's been really powerful.
It's been so prevalent. I continue to hear stories as well, like, wow, that, and my husband is a Cancer rising, so it's been interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that I've shared in several videos now is that I've had multiple family members with pretty significant health issues. Right. And that is just so like textbook. That's like just textbook Mars and Cancer, where the vulnerable spot in your life, your family, your friends that are really close, like family, whatever, it's a vulnerable place for things like that to happen.
Gosh, I've heard this week alone from clients and friends, like 5 or 6 different people saying, I'm going through a really difficult friend breakup right now. I just keep hearing that from everybody. And the family, I mean, my whole family is all Cancers. So the health issues is hitting home over here too.
Well, I feel like some of that could also stem from our Libran solar eclipse last month, right? Surely. I mean, there's so much there with friends, those Venusian connections, right? That, it's been it's been real. That's for sure. I'll just mention that my month, even though obviously like emotional, these like cardinal, the eclipse and the Aries full moon, man, they've been really, really constructive. So even though going into last month, I was like a little concerned, maybe for my emotional health, it's like all been good things for, the betterment.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good.
My sister has been dealing with some health issues, and Mars is in my 3rd. So I was like, wow, okay, there it is. She's okay, which is good. But good. Also, I think I mentioned this. I might have mentioned this in the last episode. I've certainly mentioned it on my channel a few times. So my dad has a knee replacement surgery happening right around the Mars Pluto season. I find that so interesting. It's just such an interesting surgery signature too, because Capricorn literally rules the knees.
Yeah.
He's having knee replacement. So I found that very interesting. But anyway, I do have some stories from some of the subscribers on the channel who wrote in and shared stories this past month with the Libra eclipse. So I feel like I'll share a few of those. You guys have any other stories you guys want to share before I get into them?
No, I just had like a client who pointed out some interesting parallels between, they were like, I heard you mention on the show the last eclipse cycle in October 2005. And they were like, that was pretty close to Hurricane Katrina and Wilma. And I did go back and do some digging, and there was definitely some ties there. Interesting to this more recent cycle with Helene. And then I already blocked it out. Milton. Bad
Seriously.
guy. So I thought that was really interesting. I just appreciated hearing from a client like, hey, I was chewing on these dates that you guys threw out on the show. So I wanted to put that out there.
Wow. That's so interesting. All that water. Yeah.
There's so much water we're going to look at this month as well. Just watery. So much of it. Here's a story from someone. The eclipse in Libra. Am I going crazy? Yes, it was Libra. Sorry. This eclipse hit my Mercury in the 12th house. So it would have landed on natal Mercury in Libra in the 12th house. And about 2 weeks before the eclipse, I had a random phone call with a mutual friend of my best friend that passed away in December of 2021. He informed me that he did an audio interview with her a few years back and sent it to me the day after the Libra solar eclipse conjoining my Mercury in the 12th house. So she was listening to a voice of her friend from the dead, essentially, is kind of how she goes on to describe it, around the eclipse. And And also she studied astrology together regularly with this friend who passed in 2021, and then got to hear her voice again while the eclipse landed on Mercury in her 12th.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really neat symbol. I love that story. So yes, let's see here. So we have someone who had the Libra solar eclipse in the 12th house, and long-term boyfriend broke up with her out of the blue. And she said she's devastated, but at least knowing that there was an eclipse in her 7th house made her have some deeper level of acceptance, because it was really not expected from the way she described it.
Oh no, that's really interesting, because actually over the same eclipse, my very dear friend also went through a very surprise breakup.
It's just incredible. I find this one interesting. Someone wrote in with a Libra rising, and some of these, by the way, I pulled myself, and some of them Anita sent to us this afternoon, but that's the person who helps us aggregate them from my staff. The solar eclipse in the 1st house, Libra found themselves unable, I just loved it. They found themselves unable to hold their tongue in finally just blowing up and calling out a friend. It's like, for a Libra rising, isn't that kind of perfect?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was nice. Okay, so yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this person, let's see. This person had the eclipse on their ascendant, and their father, the solar eclipse on their ascendant and their father, and that's the birth line. So the solar eclipse on the ascendant can actually activate connection to your paternity, right? Father was diagnosed with blood cancer. So just devastating. But again, like, people really expressing throughout most of these that in difficult times, when you know the astrology is so spot on, there's some way in which we could call it like at least it's astrology good.
Yeah.
Which is a weird way of saying, like, there's some peace, there's some way in which we're able to, I don't know, just resolve ourselves to the moment and the gravity of it, because we know that it's astrological.
Yeah, I like the way that you talk about this in your classes, Adam, as tying what's happening to you to a divine narrative, to something else that's happening. And it feels very validating to people that I talk to when they're able to see transits and see that there's like, oh, there's something there.
Here, and just the connection to something that's greater, right? And again, it's like the age-old question of fate and fortune, but at least it helps me make peace when tough things happen.
Yeah, exactly. This person had knowledge of astrology, and mom and dad have Cancer placements at the exact same degree. And as Mars in Cancer rolled over my mom's ascendant in Cancer, she slipped and broke her foot. I think that's really fascinating, because my daughter has Mercury in Capricorn as her ascendant ruler. And when Mars opposed it, she sprained her ankle. So, I mean, for whatever it's worth, it's just that there's that symbolism of Mars and, like, little nicks and bruises and injuries and accidents. The same week as it also conjuncted my dad's son, he got inexplicably sick. A few days after that, as it rolled over his natal Jupiter, all in his 11th house, he went to the emergency room and was found that he was severely anemic. Then on the day after the solar eclipse in Libra, it was found he has a rare type of cancer, which is basically pre-leukemia. That's what she said. Wow, isn't that crazy? Yeah, I know. Some of these are really tough, and a lot of these are reflecting the Mars in Cancer and eclipse dynamic at the same time. And the eclipse dynamic, notice how it hits a few dads, right? There's like dad stuff in there. So this is a fascinating one. So this person has Pluto on their descendant at the 29th degree. Remember that 29th degree is anaretic. called the killing degree. The descendant.
All these dramatic names.
Right?
we gotta undo this.
I'm perfectly fine to keep it. I like things that are
the killing
morbid.
degree and the Widowmaker eclipse.
That's right. That's right. Well, we gotta keep astrology goth. I'm just playing.
All right, I'll paint my nails black next time.
The more it sounds like a medieval dungeon filled with torture devices, the better. No.
Yeah.
So the 29th degree is a difficult degree. And what's interesting is that the 29th degree on the descendant, which is the place of the setting sun, also has a strong association with death, the death of the sun and the death of planet setting. This place was associated with death as well as the 8th house. Anyway, this person had a dream as Pluto came back onto that 29th degree of plucking bones from ashes of human remains after a cremation. And I had the distinct sense that what they were plucking through was a deceased ancestor of theirs. But I have no memory of anyone in particular, or even if I knew who this was when I was plucking through this. It was so real. It was so visceral. The bones were so light of weight and the superfine ash clung to my fingertips. I remember feeling that it was a joyful task, as if I was aware of the privilege to be doing this. It may seem odd or morbid, but I actually remember feeling happy. I felt no horror or squeamishness. I feel what our ancestors leave us, I mean, the good stuff, is real treasure. It can't die. It can't be burned away. And that's what I'm taking from this dream. That was something in the bones that was alive. It was beautiful in the strangest way.
Wow.
Just a beautiful Pluto in Capricorn on the descendant 29th degree kind of dream, I think.
Yeah. I wonder if they have 8th house benefics.
Yeah, right.
Enjoyment of the family stuff.
Well, if it's Capricorn, they'd have Jupiter ruling their 8th, right? It'd be Sag in the 8th. That's a good call. Yeah. And then someone else has a story about having to go into the basement. It's a very old stone basement that has a dark void of a hole which goes under the road where old infrastructure from the 1800s is still remaining. Like, yeah, that sounds like the beginning of a horror movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And I went in there. Why? Why did you do it?
Run the other way.
I've never been afraid to go down there. It's always been, for the most part, clean and dry and well lit. But I do have a childhood fear of basements for a variety of situations I don't need to elaborate on here. However, I find it peculiar that being a Cancer rising and having Mars go through my first house is definitely conjuring up all kinds of childhood stuff, family relationships, childhood memories, difficult memories, but also a lot of catharsis. Anyway, back to my story. When in the basement gathering up some items, I heard a shift and a thud and another really big thud coming from the corner where the hole is. I couldn't see it from where I was, shelving blocking my view. I felt the tightness grip around my ribs and the heat rising up into my face, and I was frozen in panic. It was probably just a mouse or maybe a rat, but my vivid imagination went right to Pluto in Capricorn. And I love that because there's someone with Pluto in the 7th again, the entrance to the underworld, and they're contemplating this hole in the basement and feeling Plutonian energy around it. And that's why I love astrology. By the way, because where else can you be like contemplating the actual presence of Hades in your life? You know, I'm like, where, you know, it's incredible. I love that in every basement we've ever had, I have always, I don't know why I got this idea from an ayahuasca ceremony. I don't know where it came from. It just popped into my head during a ceremony one night. And I decided to I had this huge jar of coins that I just collected over time. And I got this idea to leave it as an offering for Hades in every basement of every house I would ever live in.
I love that.
That's beautiful.
Right? So I've just got a jar of coins down in the basement. So, and then there's this funny thing because like the girls know that that's Pluto's jar, right?
Yeah.
And like one day we had this situation. I can't remember what it was, but for some reason we needed Virginia to have like 4 quarters for school for some reason or another. And I was like, well, we could take it from Pluto. We could,
but
like, I could ask Pluto for a loan. You should see my daughter's face just went white. It was like,
yeah, no.
Don't ask for
Okay,
the
we
wrath
won't.
of
We'll just
Hades.
leave it.
She had more wisdom than you in that moment, I think.
Exactly. But anyway, it's a kind of I love
Yeah.
creating little rituals like that and creating ways of bringing the gods into our lives, whether it's just acknowledging that Pluto is in your consciousness when you're in the basement or like whatever. I love that kind of stuff. I think that's, if you can take astrology and accompany it with some intentional rituals in your life, some altar that you have in your home, I think that's when it's really special.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a lot of clients on that for sure. And Pluto energy, I mentioned because my friend and I have been doing these shamanic journeys theming around the transits. Those are starting back up again this month. We're going to do one for Capricorns only because I think the Capricorns need some help right now this month.
Right.
And we're going to do one of kind of about Mars and Cancer before Mercury goes retrograde. But yeah, finding those little ways to access the energy, even if you just sit down and you look for images in your mind and you do a little meditation or something, the energy is very accessible and can teach us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nice. Something that when I was talking about the constructiveness of like this last moon cycle with my life, one of the things that I was finally able to integrate with regularity, crossing my fingers that it sticks, right, is that real morning ritual with journaling around the transits, pulling my cards, reflecting on the astrology of the day. And I can't tell you what a difference it is making in integrating these things, right? So good reminder.
Yeah, that's a wonderful practice. I tell my people in the year 2 program when they start learning transits, I'm like, honestly, the best way to learn just the placements of the planets and kind of memorize them and have them really present, A, look at your ephemeris every day on your, probably on your software program, but B, do some journaling around them. I mean, I would say the first 2 years of my practice, I did at least once every other day, if not every day, of tracking transits and just noting what I was feeling or connections that I saw or whatever. And then eventually, that practice changed into other things, but even just for a period of time to do that is really valuable.
It's so helpful. I have clients who send me a whole personal history of certain accidents, injuries, people with chronic illness say like, okay, here are my flare-ups. And then we can go through and actually see, oh my gosh, these are Mars aspects. Every time this happens to you is Mars crossing the ascendant or something going on. So if only going back in the past in that capacity can be really helpful.
Yeah, totally. Well, on that note, are you all ready to dive into the astrology of November?
I can't wait. I mean, maybe I can wait for the astrology itself, but let's talk about it.
Oh my God. Well, we have little titles for each part of the month. We're going to start with what we are calling the opening intensity of November, which is really taking place the first 4 days of the month. And I'm going to open the chart right now to just initially outline what we're going to be looking at in this first phase of our talk today. And that is going to be the new moon in Scorpio, which happens on the 1st, followed by Mars, the ruler of the new moon, opposing Pluto, while at the exact same time, Venus is opposing Jupiter. Now, one interesting connection I found, by the way, and I'm not sure if either of you noticed this in advance in your note gathering, but when I looked at the bounds and I used the Egyptian bounds, I noticed that the new moon is actually happening in the bound of Venus. And that there is therefore some interesting connection behind this new moon to both the Mars-Pluto opposition and the Venus-Jupiter opposition. And I thought that's interesting because they really feel so different to me, Venus opposite Jupiter versus Mars opposite Pluto. Like, could we have 2 more different looking transits? What could that possibly mean? So we're going to talk about that to open up here. These first couple of days of the cycle feature some other interesting little details that we might just kind of passively mention. For example, in the first couple of days, we're also going to see by the 4th, Mars will enter Leo. We see over the weekend, we also see Mercury enter Sagittarius. So those are 2 planetary ingresses that happen over the weekend. Is there anything else I'm missing in those first couple of days?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, those are the big ones. We try to highlight just like what we see as the most important things, but there's a couple of other little ingresses like that are interesting to note. I think Mars heading into Leo is probably the more significant ingress of the two, because Mercury moves so quickly, and because well, what's interesting is that Mercury will have mutual reception with Jupiter.
That does make it nicer.
That's kind of interesting. And then Mars moving into Leo also puts the Sun and Mars into mutual reception with each other, where Mars will be in the Sun's sign and the Sun in Scorpio is in Mars's sign. So we actually get a couple of mutual receptions with those ingresses that, along with Venus's opposition to Jupiter, feel a little bit like a silver lining in the midst of that such a turbulent transit with Mars opposite Pluto. But anything else that, just before we get into the nitty gritty and breaking down these individually, is there anything that stands out to you guys about this kind of opening intensity? Just generally, I guess.
Not exactly by degree. We're still dealing with this sort of like water trine fallout movement. I agree with you. They kind of feel like different pieces, and I have more to say about that. But it feels like this is the real culmination of all the Capricorn stuff that's been happening all summer. And this is like heavy and intense. And then the month changes. It becomes a different month. All that mutual reception that you talked about. So I think this is kind of one of the more difficult. This is the difficult part of the month for me.
I completely agree. It seems to get a little lighter. I'm happy about the mutual reception. But yeah, this first chunk, this opening intensity, man, it really feels a little dark and murky.
Yeah. Grand water trine, right? It's sort of it's not exact, but it's very close. You've got Mercury in Scorpio, Neptune in Pisces, Mars in Cancer, all connected very closely as Mars opposes Pluto at ruling a Scorpio new moon. Whew, I mean, that's intense. That's a huge potential release of energy emotionally. The feeling of like major catharsis and release, overwhelm. I mean, those are themes that come to my mind right away. But let's just talk, how do you connect the meaning of a Scorpio new moon with the ruler Mars opposing Pluto? Like what themes stand out to you for the cycle ahead, or even just the intensity of these first days?
Yeah, I was feeling a lot of like the things that were kind of coming up were like about ambition and family ambition and ancestral ambition and like lineage. There's something about like kings that's coming up because of the Jupiter stuff as well. And it was really reminding me, I feel like Cancer is like the ancestral family home, but Capricorn is like the ancestral family burial plot. And so there's this something from beyond the grave. And it was really making me think of Macbeth, like particularly Roman Polanski's Macbeth, which like definitely not going to get into it on this polite program, but Roman Polanski is a Plutonian figure. He's like Moon Pluto in a T square with Mars and Uranus, and he's got the rap sheet to show for it. But that film is so much what we're talking about. It is like the ambition of a king that then kind of becomes increasingly tyrannical and paranoid and ends up consulting with some witches, and then it leads to a crime spree with ghosts haunting him from beyond the grave and like all of this cost of ambition. So for me, this kind of felt like a inflection point or like a turning point in the quest for ambition and power and personal power, which is something that I've heard from a lot of Capricorn clients about this Pluto in Capricorn thing anyway. So when Mars is in the mix, there can be that dark side of ambition. And in Cancer, it feels a lot like that. Those Macbeth feelings were really coming up for me.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow. That's really, I'm not familiar with that particular rendition of Macbeth. So I will have to look into it for sure, because I love all the witchy stuff. I mean, hi. Yes. Similarly, the new moon in Scorpio combined with Mars opposing Pluto feels like we have this like journey into the underworld that is the new moon in Scorpio, right? And I'm feeling the transformation that can happen through destruction, right? Like creation begins with destruction. And so a lot of what was coming through for me, it was funny because as I was taking my notes on this month, I got to the end of those notes and then I watched your recent video, Adam, on the karmic fault lines of Mars Pluto. And something that you brought up that I had written word for word what prior to hearing this was the kind of Jupiter and Gemini concept of two things can be true at the same time. And that feels really potent for me here. You know, with Mars opposing Pluto and thinking very visually about this. Now, over the last month, let me tell you, I also watched the second season of Rings of Power, which is the
nice
Lord of the Rings installment, right? And for huge Tolkien fans out there, I understand there's some debate of whether this is, you know, the most accurate reflection editorially that could be presented. But let me tell you, it's a damn good show. I loved that season. And so when I was thinking about this, of course, I could not help but think about Sauron, the Lord of the Rings, right? And the Mars Pluto to me feels like the blood rage of the orcs, right? As they plow through Middle Earth. And I think it's so interesting that you brought up, Adam. Did you mention that this is, how did you mention, by bound to the Venus opposite Jupiter?
Yeah, so the new moon in Scorpio is in the bound of Venus. So that in the fact that Venus is therefore has some power in relation to the new moon, and that Venus is opposing Jupiter then comes into the picture.
I love that because I did not look into that. But even though, you know me, I'm like, oh, benefics, yeah, optimism, let's go. But I saw this Venus opposite Jupiter here with the new moon in Scorpio and Mars opposite Pluto. And there's something a little bit more sinister about this to me. It almost feels like all of this together a little bit like wolf in sheep's clothing, you know? And again, that's that two things can be true at once. And then if we think even further about it and take us back to Rings of Power, well, think about how Sauron presents himself in Rings of Power as other identities, right? He's presenting himself to Galadriel as the long-lost Halbrand, the human king of the Southlands, right? And he's presenting himself to Celebrimbor as the, you know, mythic lord of elven gifts. And so it just, that and the mutability of Venus opposite Jupiter in, you know, Sagittarius and Gemini really pulls through that two things at once for me. So that's where I went.
That. Oh, that is so dark and so interesting, and so it really like rings true to me, especially given that we have that Mercury in Scorpio hitting the Neptune and the Mars, where deceptiveness or things that fly underneath the radar, or something that looks really nice, Venus opposite Jupiter, but there's more to the story. It like a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's really interesting. That two things can be true line on this period of time in the cycle ahead. I really like where you went with that, Whitney.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I feel like one thing that almost like a sequence that I imagine we're heading into November is like a sequence that we're coming off from heading into the month is Mercury's recent opposition to Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
What will that have brought up that was unexpected or disruptive? What will it have illuminated from a darker, deeper? What kinds of motivations will it have shown or exposed? What kind of information are we becoming aware of? And that information then connected so intimately to Neptune and Mars opposite Pluto feels like it's very cathartic. It's whatever it is that comes up with Mercury's opposition to Uranus, given that it feeds into the grand water trine and then the new moon and then the Mars opposite Pluto, it feels like whatever that is might act as a trigger. So I almost wonder, you could almost back this up to that opposition that comes just, what is it, the 30th or 31st or whatever it is.
Well, also the full moon on the 15th of November is conjunct Uranus with the sun opposite Uranus. So
right. Yeah.
It definitely unfolds.
Right. Yeah, that's so powerful. I think a lot about Mars Pluto ruling a new moon in Scorpio and just thinking about, the basic reasons that ancient astrologers had for putting the moon in a debilitated position in Mars's sign and Mars in a debilitated position in the moon's sign, because that's obviously creating a mutual reception between the moon and Mars, but they're both debilitated there. So like, why was Mars and the moon, why were they seen as difficult? And it's very, very simple in a way. The moon was called fortune and Mars was the god of bad fortune. It was that simple for them. Mm-hmm. Bad fortune in the ancient world did not mean evil. It did not mean absolute dichotomies between good and bad. It's about honoring and acknowledging human experience and how we evaluate or describe human experience. For example, a blowout with a lover, a big fight you get in, most people would be like, that was a bummer, right? So in the ancient world, that's bad fortune. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a good reason to have a fight or that you didn't learn something from it or that it didn't have a divine sacredness to it. It just means that was a bummer. Sorry we had to fight, And the fact that it's that simple to me is something that we just overlook all the time. And we just way overthink the meanings of difficult dignities at times, trying to, just like kind of trying to redeem difficult planets. And it's like, well, I mean, all we're really saying is that Mars in Cancer, for example, will tend to bring up things that we experience as challenging and difficult. To what? To the desired state of being that we have as creatures in the realm of fortune, which is flow, safety, sweetness, peace, ease, happiness, right? Like those are like the lunar themes are always kind of the themes that you think of as like creating a little bit of a homeostasis, like the mom ideally creates a feeling of everyone feeling safe and good and fed and whatever, like kind of think about the archetypal mothering role. Well, Mars in Cancer provides you with a sick mom that can't cook or take care of you, or Mars in Cancer provides you with things that threaten the peace and stability of your home or family, right? But those are only a few examples. But anyway, the point is when I think about this new moon in Scorpio, a difficult place for the moon, ruled by Mars opposing Pluto, a difficult place for Mars, but they're in mutual reception with one another. I think about something that could represent a real difficulty, like a difficult cycle for lunar themes.
Yeah.
So lunar themes, main themes with family, home, body, mothers, more vulnerable emotional spaces. And it's just a little bit more of a turbulent month for those things, especially the beginning of the month where Mars literally, directly opposes Pluto. So the opening of the cycle feels like pretty dramatic, pretty cathartic, pretty difficult stuff for energies for lunar things, difficult experiences. Does that mean that ultimately there could be something good about this, something transformational, something of great value, something healing, something that you need to process or let go of course. But probably these point to some difficult encounters or releases or like moments of catharsis in at least the first opening days of the cycle.
Yeah, I love that the way you talked about two things at once, Whitney, and because something that was coming up for me that ties into all this too was like The Sopranos. Like I kind of just couldn't get Tony Soprano out of my head, like being a mob boss and being a dad, and just the interactions that he has with his family and that tension that he has every day when he comes home, or maybe something like The Godfather, and also the tension between the family and his literal family. Those two things being true at once. And so I think a lot of that was coming up. And I agree with you, Adam. It's I see clients a lot who are like, oh no, what's going to happen to me? Like, is something horrible going to happen because I have
astro
this
anxiety.
difficult transit in my chart? And it's kind of like, okay, but you've lived your whole life with that in your chart. You have your whole life of experiences, and we can go through and see that. So I feel that hard in a time like Mars and Cancer.
Yeah, I think the fact that the two planets are in mutual reception might suggest that there will be somehow resources will be available that will help us to confront or deal with, what's coming up. Something I'm always reminded about with Scorpio is that, this autumnal part of the year where the darkness is steadily deepening into the darkest time of the year. This is, of course, from the symbolic standpoint of the Northern Hemisphere, that there's two ways that we typically, I think Scorpio can be kind of go in two directions that I like to use. One is we have attachments, and the deepening of the darkness, one of the things that it signifies is death, which we can think about in the most basic sense as a relinquishment of attachment. The most fundamental one is to our bodies. It's like, I don't want to die. I don't want to let go of my body, but the soul will pass out of its body. And then on the other hand, you have, so any kinds of attachments that have to be relinquished and let go of, and that we have to be separated from through crisis or turmoil or difficulty, are very Scorpionic. That's why it's a Mars ruled sign, right? But on the other hand, Scorpio has this role to play when it comes to attachments that need protecting. Like sometimes there are invasive or predatorial energies that seek to destroy or that are like invasive and that want to take something. And so Scorpio, the other direction that Scorpio often goes in is with respect to protectiveness or kind of like a guardianship. And I've been listening to this podcast called The Emerald, and he had this episode about guardianship that I just loved. And he was talking about how in so many traditions, you don't just walk around this completely open person. You have gates that open and close, and because you have this real deep respect for the need of for protection, you have spirits that are protector spirits you work with in so many traditions. Even Buddhism, people would think of Buddhists are just open, flowing bodhisattvas. It's like, yeah, the vast tradition, the vast history of Buddhism is filled with animistic relationships with guardian spirits. It's very shamanic in many ways. So, our sometimes I feel like our New Age spirituality could deal with a little bit more of an understanding of protectors and guardians and things like that, a little bit more of an animistic perspective. But my point here is that this cycle could go in the direction of, what are we protecting? What do we need to protect at all costs? And what do we need to endure? And how do we fortify? And I could see the Mars Pluto being about enduring a crisis and protecting from something that it almost feels like something's trying to be taken from us and we have to protect, which interestingly, Venus opposite Jupiter is sometimes associated with possessions and resources.
Sure.
And so when you see the opposition between the two, there can be tension that exists around wealth and resources and so on and so forth. So, well, that's interesting. So two different ideas, images that came to my head. One was, okay, so there could be a theme of feeling like someone is trying to cheat you or take something from you that you feel like you really have to protect. The Venus-Jupiter opposition can make you feel as though some resource is under threat, and that you're in danger of it being taken. But the other thing would be that if you are called to utilize resources to protect or aid or support, a great outpouring of support for this purpose of protection and guardianship could also be seen with Venus opposite Jupiter and the Scorpionic theme of protecting things. So I just thought those are interesting angles to take with Mars, Pluto, and Venus, Jupiter. Maybe there's a theme of some things we don't want to be parted with. Well, Venus, Jupiter opposite is representative of greed in ancient astrology. It's one of the ways that ancient authors talk about that opposition is in terms of, spending too much on your credit card or or
Yeah.
trying to amass or accumulate things. And could there be some theme of having to deal with or face attachments and what we don't want to let go of that we do have to let go of? Or on the other hand, could there be a theme of almost like a charitable sharing of resources for the sake of protecting or safeguarding things? So those are some images that came to my mind.
That was so spot on, Adam. And I really, really appreciate the protection angle, because listen, I think if you consume astrology these days, Scorpio gets a bad rap, right? Scorpio keeps secrets and all of this nonsense, right? But isn't keeping a secret just protecting your truth or protecting the truth of a friend? And so I think that is such a powerful way to look at it, and something that I'll take with me. Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. I had something along those lines kind of coming up with a kingly figure. It was giving me like, busy feast hall and like the king's advisors and everyone's sitting there having a good time, but there's like those whispers out in the crowd. There's people, there's unrest, there's something unsettling no one can quite pin until, of course, it's like maybe just a little too late. Maybe I'm back at Macbeth here, but that was like coming up for me a lot.
No, I love that. Yeah, one of the other things that was said about Venus opposite Jupiter is that it tends to create or amplify one of the tensions between Venus and Jupiter. Although they're both benefics, astrologers would mention that morality or virtue or piety will be pitted against sensuality. So that you have that theme of like, I'm going to be a good moral person and do the right thing. And then Venus is like, I'm going to go to the spa and treat myself. They're not opposites, but they are. You know what I mean? We frequently think that, I mean, throughout the history in the Christianity in the West, we have a tremendous polarization between sexuality, the human body, shame, and the morals or like the virtues and doctrines of the church. Like that, there's been a long tension between those things in church history. Of course, clergy, in order to be pure, you can't be sexual. That's a thing in the Catholic Church. Not saying it's right or wrong. It's just Venus, Jupiter have this background of, there's like a tension around. Like here's another thing that Venus, Jupiter like this could pose would be, how more so in my opinion, like the last decade than at least when I was younger, there's been a surge of protests or demonstrations. Oh, this comedian is coming to the campus to give to do a stand-up show, and there's protests because maybe their humor goes too far and is maybe inappropriate or something, or maybe it's perceived to be inappropriate. I'm not saying it is or isn't. That kind of thing is also very Venus Jupiter, where the kind of a polarizing some kind of moral or polemical or like ideological view against something that's meant to be like entertaining or performative or something. Those tensions to me are interesting to consider in the midst of all of this, because we also have, I think, something about what could be initially looked at as like Venus in Sag could have something on her mind that's like fun and it's no big deal, but it suddenly meets with some kind of tremendous like ideological backlash or opposition. And we could see that as a part of the clash of the Mars-Pluto opposition. It's like a clash of wills over something that is about a different set of beliefs or ideas or opinions. I even wonder if it could present like that.
I wonder how that ties in too, because Mercury, later in the month comes in to Sagittarius and then forms the opposition with mutual reception, which this is another one where it's like the mutual reception. I'm not sure that it totally makes it nicer, the temple swapping, but it takes us from that like sensual, spiritual into, I think, actually a better spiritual place. Like that was bringing up for me like walking as a spiritual practice or like some sort of more asceticism. And then Mercury will, of course, retrograde and then station direct again. So it's kind of an extended period of mutual reception in detriment for both.
Well, there's that two things can be true. right?
Yeah.
Almost like that.
100%.
I love that theme. That they're like that theme could be the slogan for the month. In fact, it's making me feel like we need to, like, in the next month I need to do like a riff off from Whitney's "Two Things Can Be True." And well, I mean, I'm not whoever said it first. I heard it somewhere too, so I have no idea. Whoever first said it, thank you, because it's a great little phrase. But we maybe need to riff on that with Jupiter this month. But like that is like such a good point, which is that, this mutual. Here's what I would almost associate it with. Like, as the month goes on, is there some way in which, it's like, what's that saying? The pot calling the kettle black or whatever. Is that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where I wonder about like sort of ironic juxtapositions of what people say and what they do, or almost like people being exposed for the exact opposite thing they say they are, or what I mean, something like that, or even people that look like they're one thing actually being another, and it turns out they're not. What you've judged them inaccurately or something.
Right.
Yeah, there's a sign. Oh, go ahead.
No, you please.
I was just going to point out that there's also this like sign-based square to Saturn throughout all of this stuff. And it kind of has moved that mutable T-square-ish thing going on over here. Whereas before it was from Virgo to Gemini to Pisces. In the summer, it's kind of transited. And so we'll want to watch the moon for sure, especially as the moon is in Virgo, or if you have Virgo placements, like that's going to be hitting you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why don't we bring it back a little bit? And on that note, why don't we take this into mid-month? Yeah. The next major section of astrology comes around the middle of the month. And we're going to start on the 12th, speaking of Mercury, with a square from Mercury to Saturn. This is happening on Tuesday, November 12th. And it's one of the more interesting signatures around the middle of the month that comes just before the full moon as well, which we'll visit in a second. But let's take a look at this one. So Mercury's in the superior position, Mercury overcoming Saturn. To me, when I see Mercury overcoming Saturn, one of the things that comes to my mind immediately, because I've seen it many times, is that Mercury overcoming Saturn is often about finding creative or intelligent or strategic maneuvers or decisions or ideas that can help you overcome what initially seems like an obstacle or an impediment. Because of that overcoming square, it's like Mercury will find some way of overcoming something that Saturn presents, although initially may be sort of held back or frustrated by it. That's something that comes to my mind. What do you guys think about this one?
Yeah, it feels a little like Mercury and Venus are conspiring against Saturn here, especially looking at the bounds there where they are in each other.
Oh, wow.
And then Venus has just moved into Saturn's sign of Capricorn, co-present with Pluto. So it does feel a little bit like some forces conspiring against a little bit of the doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Right. And with the square, there are tensions. To me, this Mercury square Saturn could almost be previewing our Mercury retrograde at the end of the month, because it has that. To me, this has, even though Mercury is in the superior position, it has that quality to me of almost like snuffing a flame, if that resonates. Like, and the flame is our insight, right? But like, or it's like, when you light a candle and the wick is too short and you've got that real weird little baby sort of flame that just won't take off, and you're like, come on. So I wonder if there's something here about how we're stoking the flame of our insight.
Nice.
Yeah,
Mercury.
Really nice.
Yeah, I like that image. Mercury Saturn squares will often coincide with a tightening or narrowing of focus, and as well as sometimes a limitation in the way that we're thinking, like don't limit yourself. That's like a good response to Mercury square Saturn. Don't be too limited in your thinking. Also trying to get things right, or being a little bit perfectionistic, or a little overly strict or methodical. At the same time, Mercury square Saturn is wonderful for things like, learning the technical exact science, or learning the exact way to do a technique in astrology. So it's wordsmithing and careful editing and things like that. So it's a what I find interesting about it is really the fact that it is preceding the opposition to Jupiter with that mutual reception, which happens on the 18th. And then, of course, we're seeing Jupiter and Saturn coming back together in December in their next square. I wonder if this isn't almost like, especially given Mercury's retrograde at the end of the month, which takes place on the 25th in Sagittarius. We'll jump to that again later. But then it'll come back through all of this. So it really does feel like it's the precursor to the kind of structural redesigning that Jupiter and Saturn are about to do. That this Mercury retrograde is somehow anticipating the kinds of structural, like the renovations and reorganizings of larger structures, both socially, culturally, politically, and personally, that Jupiter Saturn are going to do. And somehow Mercury is kicking us off by hitting Saturn, hitting Jupiter, retrograding back and doing the same thing. And then by the time Mercury's direct and going through them again, now it's Jupiter Saturn time in their square.
100%. And with this particular Mercury square Saturn, I think it's interesting that that aspect releases just prior to the full moon and Saturn turning direct. So it almost feels, with Mercury in the superior position, that Mercury is this catalyst for change, right? So like, what have we learned in these areas, these Jupiterian, Venusian areas of our life that we're ready to move forward with?
It's totally like, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
It's like reminding me of the opening sequence of like an Indiana Jones movie where he's like foiled in a beautiful and comic way. And then, of course, we have the full moon in Venus ruled. There's some Uranus action, Saturn stations direct. And it's like we spend a bunch of time learning and crafting little fun solutions and maybe falling in love on the way. And then we get to go back to the temple and like actually escape the closing door or whatever.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, the image that came to my mind with the little T-square here in Mercury's, because Mercury and Jupiter are opposed but in mutual reception, and because Jupiter's doing this square as the ruler of Saturn in Pisces, with Saturn, I'm like, okay, so there's a story that just popped into my head while I was looking at this, literally just right now. And when I was a kid, there was another kid that I just had like a feud with. There's just some people where it's just like, this is my nemesis. And I don't know why, because I'm only in fourth grade, but this is just my nemesis. It's like,
I don't know what a nemesis is, but you're it, guy.
You're my like my shadow or something. And I'm like his shadow. This is very Jupiter and Gemini, right? Anyway, and so there was a day on the playground where there was this kid who I was in like an altercation with because of how we were playing football. We were arguing about the way a play went.
Were you fighting on the playground, Adam?
We were not fighting. We were arguing, right? But it was like things were escalating. And so anyway, what I find really interesting is that this kid that I had this brutal opposition with also really despised this kid that I was getting into a fight with. And so the kid, and this was in the winter in Minnesota, the kid I was getting into it with over how the football game was being played threw a punch at me. We're wearing like winter gloves, so this didn't really connect in a way that was very painful, but he hit me on the side of the head, punched me. And my nemesis ran in. He was a hockey player. He played hockey. So they're just programmed to jump on people and pull their shirt over their head and just start pounding on them. So he jumped in. The kid was wearing a starter jacket. You remember those?
Of course. Those
Miami
are back
Dolphins
now.
In Minnesota, everyone had I don't know why, the Miami Dolphins, probably the colors. Yeah. And it was a dolphin. So dolphins, but And he ran in, he pulled the hood of his Miami Dolphins starter over his head and just started pounding him. And then we were friends. From that moment forward, my nemesis and I were buddies. And I swear to God, like I started going over to his house a lot. And anyway, the point of that story, and the kid was okay. And he was another kid, like he was just another kid that we played with all the time. And like by the next day, we were all fine. Like that's 4th grade, you know? So anyway, but the point is that this image popped into my head where it's like, you what's the thing? The friend of my enemy is my, how does that go? Do you know what I'm talking
Enemy
about?
of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah. So anyway, it's something like the reverse of that. The enemy of my enemy becomes an enemy that I can focus on in order to transform the relationship with my enemy
into friendship.
You found your common ground.
Yeah. So could there be something like that going on? Because that mutual reception is an opposition, but mutual reception, and they're both trying to deal with Saturn. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter rules Saturn. Mercury's overcoming Saturn. Mercury's in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter's in Mercury's sign. It feels like they're both trying to deal with Saturn. And maybe their opposition, their beef gets set aside because they can come together over something to do with Saturn.
Yeah, that's a really brilliant connection, Adam. You've outdone yourself on that one today.
Dude,
so good.
when that image, when that like memory popped into my head, I was like, oh my God, that's perfect. I love doing this. Like, you know what it's like with astrology when you're doing this for a long time? It's like your brain, when you start talking about symbols, it's like when you tell your brain, hey, what were the lyrics to that song? I can't remember. And then like 5 minutes later, you go, oh yeah, this was the song or whatever. And it's like that. When you start talking about things, your brain's like, I know, it's like this. Well, thank you. That's really helpful.
You've been taking your lion's mane.
Yes, totally. Actually, we just plotted out for our Roots and Spheres class next year. One of the, I think it's lion's mane that we're using during the Aquarius moon cycle.
Oh, hell so yeah. I have to say, being part of Roots and Spheres, anyone who is not part of it, please join for 2025. Literally changed my life. But I've been taking lion's mane since we started taking lion's mane last February. Like the cognition, the quickness, the memory, it's amazing. Little plug for lion's mane.
It's a good one for sure. Well, let's move on then to the full moon, which is on the 15th. And let's take a look at this full moon, which is conjoined with Uranus in Taurus, right on my ascendant. Fun times. This ought to be interesting. I'm at 25 Taurus rising, so I've been looking at this one for a while going, okay, I'm gonna like, I'm not gonna hide, but I'm gonna have to get like astro proof, like astro armor or something.
Listen, you made it through the Mars Uranus, like an exalted moon Uranus. That's kind of feels like it could be a fun, surprising thing.
That's thank you. I'm looking, let's do it like that. That sounds good.
And if I'm being honest, I feel like this is where some of that levity comes in. Like with all of this Venus here, and maybe it's just my rose-colored glasses, but I feel like, are we experiencing a revolution around Venusian themes? And I'm so excited that this is conjunct Uranus, because I know Uranus is a wild rebel. Some of us Aquarians may be more comfortable in that energy than others. I'm really excited for this. So I'm interested to see what happens, Adam, and keep us all posted.
I'll be ready.
If
I get grabbed, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
it's definitely like, it's definitely nicer than the Mars Uranus. And like Venus can see what's happening, but through sign-based trines. So there's some of that.
Well, I will be, this last week, I just started in bodybuilding, you go through cycles of bulking and then cutting, which is basically you put on some muscle, but with muscle comes a little bit of water and fat. So then after you put on some muscle, you cut back, and that seesaw over time is how you build the physique or whatever. That's just like a super simple summary. And there's other ways too, but that's a pretty common one. Anyway, so I find it interesting that this will be really, as my bulk program is gaining some traction. So I've been kind of hoping that it might contribute to good results in that sense, but whatever, that's pretty vain and basic. So
it doesn't mean it's not important. We all
Yeah.
have our
it's my
priorities,
hobby.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's a few things that I have outside of astrology that really get me excited, and like outside of like family and astrology, work and
Yep.
home, and that would be sports and bodybuilding. And it always changes. Well, my guitar too, like that gets me pretty excited. Practicing and learning new things on guitar, for sure. It used to be traveling, but you know what? I feel like the older I get, the more that traveling feels like torture. I don't know why that is. If it's just like I'm becoming more Cancerian.
It's
Yeah,
so
well, that would be a big
disruptive.
part of it.
It's so disruptive, especially for a fixed rising sign with your chart ruler and another fixed sign. It's like you're just disrupting your whole life for fun for a while, especially if you're doing bodybuilding and nutrition and you disrupt that routine. It's really disruptive.
That's true. That is definitely a part of it. I think it is also what Whitney said about kids, though. Anyone out there listening to this, you guys tell us what you think about travel and whether you love it and are maybe you have a bunch of Sag energy. I feel like Sages like to travel, but yeah. Anyway, so what other thoughts do we have about the full moon in Taurus that we might add in here?
Yeah. Do you guys have you seen the movie Moonlight? I guess I'm taking everybody to film school today.
Is that the Oscar winner?
Yeah.
I love that movie. That was a good one.
Yeah, it was kind of bringing up some of this for me, like that nocturnal love, the restrictions, some of the surprising and shocking stuff that happens in those relationships, but also in Chiron's life, the will to individual expression and like suppression of identity versus like expression, and sometimes release or like explosion even of identity out into a situation. And so kind of some of this was reminding me of that movie for some reason.
Oh, that's a good one.
I'll
Isn't
have
it
to
interesting?
see
The name when I saw it, I was like, oh, it sounds like
did too.
Chiron.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's spelled like that, but anyway.
It's spelled like Chiron, but they say it Chiron.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that was a great movie. I think it actually came out the same, because there's a guy who's doing a talk for Nightlight in like the next year. His name's Nadav, and he did this amazing presentation on the astrology present in the sky on Oscar nights and what films win.
Oh,
and he did this whole theme on La La Land and Moonlight and the energies that were in the air at the time of the award ceremony that matched with the kind of nocturnal themes of La La Land and
that's
Moonlight.
so interesting. Yeah, it looks like it was released pretty much on a Virgo eclipse, so we're in that cycle.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, so when it comes to Venusian revolution, especially with respect to the moon, you're thinking about often like the body. So yeah, I mean, whether it's a change of style, a change of aesthetic, a change of appearance, a change of wardrobe, cutting your hair, dyeing your hair, those things are, on the one hand, there's this great I Ching hexagram number 22 called adornment. And it's talking about how there's a way in which adornment can be nothing but vain and superficial. Like what you wear can be just so superficial and vain. But on the other hand, adornment is also a reflection of essence. And your adornment should be reflective of your essence too. So there's like Venus, when Venus comes out of the ocean, immediately she's adorned. And I just think of that as like, well, people can mistake Venus for adornment, but actually Venus has to do with the adornment of the soul. It's like when you find something that you like to wear that really feels like you, or a haircut or something, there's a way in which you just feel like, yes, at least right now in this chapter, this season of my life, this is me. And it's not that you mistake yourself for the article of clothing you're wearing. It's that it feels like it reflects and adorns something authentic about who you are.
Hell yes. Preach. As your co-host who went to fashion school, this is what it's all about for me.
Oh, now. Really? You did? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I no longer work in the fashion industry because, it's...
You got stories.
Yeah, not the greatest, most encouraging and uplifting environment. What it does have is lots and lots of beautiful clothing, and that's where it's always been for me, is how the way we adorn ourselves not only affects others' perception of us, right? But really at its heart, it is all about it reflects how we feel about ourselves. And I think that's such an important lesson. And having worked as a stylist and worked with clients who have either lost or not quite grasped what sense of style is, and watching that transformation that happens when somebody really finds like something that works for them, it is just so beautiful.
That is so Moon Uranus in Taurus vibe right there. Because I know what you're talking about. You see those videos and the person's just kind of, you're like, okay, that's who they are. But then when you see the negative space between their true joy, the exuberance, the expressions that they have when they feel like they are showing as they want to be shown and being seen as they want to be seen, that's a really beautiful tie-in, Whitney.
I like where we've gone so far with this. I'm going to turn it into, I have to flip it into Hades for a second.
Something gothic.
We're going to the basement.
We need to go to the basement.
Fashion show in the basement. That could.
That's right. That would actually be. You know, it reminds me, like, you know, Moon Taurus in Uranus reminds me of like Rocky Horror Picture Show, especially with the little trine to Pluto. You know, the opposition to the Sun in Scorpio. But anyway. No, the thing that comes to my mind as well is that, okay, so in Taurus, we have the opposite of what we have in Scorpio with those two things I was talking about, where Scorpio, you have maybe attachment and protection as like themes, like letting go of attachments, death and detachment as major crises or moments of death and transformation and rebirth, and as well as guarding or protecting things from being taken or something like that. Well, in Taurus, you have two directions that things will often go in, which have to do with possession, right? So you come into possession of things that you desire. So Taurus has so much to do with the pursuit of what we desire and the possessing of what we desire. But there's this weird way in which Taurus is very much like Scorpio, because its shadow is the Minotaur. You know, the bull and the Minotaur, and we can become possessed by what we think we possess has possessed us, and that's epitomizes the story of King Minos in the Minotaur. If you ever heard that story, I won't do the whole thing, but so I could see the Moon and Uranus being this very powerful symbol of allowing ourselves to love and want and desire what we desire. You know, just freedom of desire, and to move into an attachment of what we desire, because we're no longer repressing or holding back, or we're somehow letting ourselves just eat the piece of cake, you know. But on the other hand, we could see this as a moment of exorcism, that the full moon in Taurus on Uranus could be about exorcising the Minotaur, where we have to become dispossessed in order to be free of something that has taken hold of us, even though we think we're holding it.
Yeah, that's certainly bringing in that trine to Pluto.
Right?
We can't discount.
Sorry.
And like the Sun in Scorpio and Mars in Leo for sure.
Really interesting. I kind of want to talk about the process, right? I think that that's another recent focus of yours, Adam, right? Is the process, right? Rather than the event. And we just recently had a Venus ruled Libran solar eclipse, right? And so I'm thinking about this and wondering how that eclipse plays in here. Like, this is how we focus on Venus in a different way. And so what was happening, or what has come from the solar eclipse in Libra, and could we already be, this is a full moon with realizations, right? Could we already be reaping some of the hopefully rewards, or we could at least say karma of the new possible structures that we put in place around the Libran eclipse?
Yeah.
And does that impact the Taurus area of our chart?
I love that. And I've got to say that it's interesting to me that the ruler of that full moon, Venus, will be in Capricorn. So there's a trine configuration. And, one of the things that Venus in Capricorn, I think, is really good at is putting in whatever work or effort it takes to accomplish or achieve what you desire. Like Venus, I know this great story that I had a client who had Venus in Capricorn who built furniture. And she was a designer, but she actually had a shop where they built the furniture. And she, kind of like someone in the fashion world, I imagine, where design was really important. There was an aesthetic and everything, but then there was this literal chopping and sawing and, just the whole actual building. And she was just, relentless designer and worker and crafter and, woodworker and all this stuff. So I always think about that person when I think about Venus in Capricorn. And her dad, I believe, built guitars or something like that. So anyway, and she had Venus in the 4th house, by the way, in Capricorn, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I love that.
Like,
oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I love that Pluto is leaving and Venus is staying.
That's nice.
As a Cap rising, I am not kidding. I have another friend who is a Capricorn astrologer, and we are going to throw an Instagram live party, and everyone is welcome to come celebrate with us. This once in our lifetimes, like goodbye Pluto. We'll tell stories. We're celebrating. Nice. We're having a party.
Nice. Wait, this one's not just for Capricorns, right?
No, anyone can come. Anyone can come.
Make sure I'm going to tell you all at the end how you can follow Alexandra and join her for her party.
God. Yeah.
Pluto's back into Aquarius. Yes, and into Aquarius, which is our next topic on the 19th. So this is really the next section of the story we're telling for the month, with only one other thing really on our list of things to cover today, which is Mercury's retrograde, which we already touched on a little bit, but Pluto entering Aquarius. So I just finished what I think is going to be about 120 slide webinar on Pluto in Aquarius. And most of what I did involves extrapolation from Pluto's last period, which was around 1778 to 1798 or 1777 to 1798 or something like that. It's about 20 years. And it coincided with the American Revolution, the French Revolution, many events that would kind of perpetuate the Industrial Revolution, things that were coming off from the Scientific Revolution. I mean, it's just revolution, revolution, revolution. I am really interested to see where things go now that Pluto is not just poking his head in the door, so to speak, or its head in the door, but like now I'm here to stay. I have a feeling this ingress will be the most powerful of those that we've had. I think we've had 2 previous ingresses. This will be, I think, probably the most significant because it really does feel different when a planet pops in and then is there to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the title of your talk? I just want to hear you say it.
Yeah, so it's Pluto in Aquarius, AI, Aliens, and New World Orders.
It made me happy to read it. So I just wanted you to own it.
I'm so excited about that talk. And it's funny because in so many ways, the themes of artificial intelligence, aliens, and New World Orders were all present during that last period in ways
absolutely.
that are metaphorical, right? But the same themes were present. And I'm excited because there's no topic that I think I get more geeked out about than the potential for human beings to discover any kind of life outside of our solar system, for sure, definitively, because of how I'm just convinced that it would shift culture and consciousness in a major way on planet Earth. So
it really would, but I think there's a lot of tension I think it's so easy to forget about the tension if you're a person who's excited by that. But there
Mhm.
are like there's a lot of disruption and tension and maybe nihilism, maybe destruction that could be inspired by everyone on earth finding out something that challenges your fundamental epistemological
Yeah.
foundational knowledge of existence. Like, it's so huge. I'm really excited about disclosure too, and we've been definitely seeing it the minute um Pluto moved into Aquarius. I think another interesting part of Pluto Aquarius is like we kind of track the Sun Pluto cycle, but in this case, those oppositions are going to happen with the Sun in Leo. And so I think we talked about this before, but I think there's going to be so much tension between the individual and the sense of me, and then the sense of like, oh, there's so much more than even just this big wide earth. There's so much more to what's going on here. And also, I think there's like there's an isolating element to individualism and individuality, not on like a political level. I'm thinking more along the lines of AI and just where that's going. Like, when I was growing up, for example, like we would read and write fan fiction, like just to give you an example, like where that's how we got the stories we wanted to hear. Okay, teens and kids today are going to be able to have AI write stories about them. They're going to be able to have their favorite artists, like, hey, have Post Malone sing a song about me and my boyfriend and actually conjure that up. And there's something that's so insanely isolating about that I think that
Yeah.
there's a real tension that's going to emerge from like those little micro communities that kind of used to pop up around those niche interests and around those spaces where you would gather. Everyone's kind of going to be playing with that in their own spaces now. And so I feel a lot of that tension too, among many other Plutonian stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's so exciting. As your resident Aquarius, I am so excited for Pluto in Aquarius, which I know sounds wild because I have clients reaching out to me like, I have astro anxiety about Pluto and Aquarius, and what's going to happen? And are we going to be okay? And are we going to get through this? And I am just over here like, bring it on. This is so exciting. It's such an interesting discussion. I have a lot to say about AI. I work in the corporate world in my 9-to-5 job, and AI has been a hugely top of mind topic now in my organization, really seriously the last 6 months to a year, right? As Pluto has been ingressing and out of Aquarius. And I had the pleasure of attending last month the Trend Hunter conference in Toronto that was focused all around artificial intelligence. Not only all of these various tools that are coming to be, but basically what the future of AI looks like. And something I came away with was just how fast the acceleration is happening.
Hmm.
Basically, even within the last 6 months with AI, with generative AI, we're talking images and videos, right? There are these programs you could say, make me a video of one of the examples they used was Kamala Harris and Donald Trump riding away into the sunset on horseback.
Oh my
And
God.
okay, so crazy because 6 months ago, the technology resulted in like stick figure, awful, whatnot. But now, right now, that technology in only 6 months has become so advanced that it's almost indistinguishable, right? And so what's so interesting about how quickly this is happening is how we're all going to have to react to it so
Hmm.
so fast, right? And the entire time I was sitting there and everyone was getting so excited about AI, I'm over here like, what about humanity? Like, what about artificial intelligence? Sure, but aren't we going to have to see some sort of response that is like radical humanism rather than radical artificial intelligence? It's mind-boggling. And Alexandra, I think you're absolutely right that nihilistic perspective, there's something very Aquarian about that too, right? It's like pressure in the form of nihilism or angst. Like, what has humanity become? What will it become? And does it even matter? Will we even be here to witness it, right?
Right. Yeah, that certainly a lot of people, I mean, just I've, in the past couple of years, as I reflect on things that I've spoken to my friends about, and there's this growing sense of like, I don't know what the word is. It's like a helplessness, like the individual is too small in relation to collective forces, which is interestingly Aquarian. Like that I think that really started to rise into our experience collectively since the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. I'm not saying that it's, I think there's been some really interesting and very positive things that configuration has brought as well. But it is important to note that Pluto is essentially, as it ingresses this month, it will be reactivating that 0 degree of Aquarius point where Jupiter and Saturn conjoined back in 2021. Do I have that right? Is it 2020? I can't remember.
Sorry, which one?
Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius. Was that December of
December 21st, 2020.
2020.
Just
okay,
off the top of her head.
It was December 21st. That's why it's in your head as 2021.
It was the winter solstice, right? You know what I mean? So that's yeah. But anyway, the interesting thing about, I was doing my research for this talk that I'm doing, and one of the things that I thought was so profound was you have like the so many things that are the wheels of the Industrial Revolution are beginning, and there's this huge starting to be a belief that institutions can save humans from the worst. And whether that's in the form of democracy in the French and American revolutions, or that's technology or medicine, or that the institutions and technology can save and take us to the next level, is kind of like the promise of Aquarius, like better social organization, better social programs, better social organization, better technological things can take us into a better space. And there's, remember that image of Ganymede, the water bearer who is abducted by Zeus and taken up to the realm of the gods, because he's like an exceptional human and he gets to hang out with the gods, and he's the close proximity to the gods is also a dissociating thing, right? He's separated from humankind, but he's close to the gods. Is an interesting position. But Aquarius so resembles that tension of taking us close to things that are sort of godly, but will also potentially dissociate us. And so there's this weird way in which what's really fascinating is at the very end of Pluto and Aquarius, all of these super intense romantic kinds of philosophical and artistic ideals started pushing back against the Aquarian ideals. And you have the beginnings of romanticism with, of course, Pluto and Pisces being a huge part of that like wave in art and culture and literature, and even the East meets West spirituality that came in through romanticism. But what I found interesting was that you had people like, like the earlier part of the Pluto and Aquarius transit, there's like, democracy, the rights of the individual, equality. And then gradually as it goes on, like there's like a shadow of colonialism and like the state as salvation that is like a part of some of the bloodiest portions of the genocide of Native American people in the United States, or that's part of the continued development of slavery in the South, and the cotton gin is developed. And in Australia, is it is it I always mess this up. Great Britain, right? So they end up occupying. Do I have that right? Is that the way that what was the country named? Was it Great Britain? Is that like a new way of? I think it's Great Britain.
I
Anyway,
have no idea.
So too.
they occupied.
You're right.
Well, they colonized Australia and started slaughtering
Right.
indigenous people in Australia during
Aboriginals.
Pluto in Aquarius. And there's other examples too, like the Second Awakening in U.S. religious history happened while Pluto was in Aquarius, where the institutions of the church were thought of as the vehicle through which humanity would achieve salvation in the second coming, and they would midwife the apocalypse. And like, so it's really interesting to me how these huge Aquarian systems and ideas become the vehicle for human progress, but also have this way of stamping out things that are diverse and individual and particular, like Native American tribes or individual groups of people that aren't a part of the great manifest destiny, which is also an idea, by the way, that had its seeds during Pluto and Aquarius, or that was like greatly expressed during that period. Anyway, so all of that is just to say that I think it's also mind-blowing to think that this transit is coinciding with the transit of Neptune in Aries, which took place during the American Civil War most recently. Those two together are, just very, it's like sort of startling that there's a real promise of major cultural and political revolution on the horizon. And some of it could be very exciting.
Yeah.
And I think some of it, there'll be shadows, right?
Let's not even talk about Uranus into Gemini. Let's let
I
the
know, right?
let's let the doomsayers talk about that one.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's reminding me of this great painting from the French Revolution called The Death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David. And it was a painting of a French revolutionary who was murdered by a woman in his bathtub. And it's so Mars in Cancer. Mars was in Cancer at the time. Pluto was in Aquarius at the time of his death. And he had his natal Venus in Cancer, and Mars had just crossed over his natal Venus, and he was betrayed and murdered in this way. And so I've been thinking about that a lot too. I'm sure I'll make a little video about that. But there's something that's so revolutionary and interesting. And I love that you bring up that it morphs over time and changes over time. I mean, just reflecting on the way that Pluto has inspired us to think about things like financial resources, our relationship with the earth, our relationship to work while it's been in Capricorn, for example, and how those topics have changed in our cultural consciousness from 2008 until now. It's like, I kind of can't wait to see how it plays out in a mundane way. But Whitney, I'm handing you the torch, babe. You take Pluto away. You have fun with Pluto in your Aquarius parts.
For a second, I lost my screen share, so I don't know what happened. I think
there might have been like a little flash I saw, but I think we're good.
Well, anyway, it would have just been flashing insights from our business. That like we have like a data tracking website that I think might have flashed up for a second, but it's like it tracks like whatever your sales for the day. It's like your shopping cart page. So you can see how many people bought a webinar today if it flashed up on the screen, apparently.
Lots of people signing up for the November. What will this be? Nightlight 28 year one?
This will be Nightlight 29.
Wow.
So awesome, Adam. I've had so many clients email me. I joined Adam's class. I finally did it. It's been so cute.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. So I was just looking back at my notes really quick because I wanted to double check this. Yeah, so it was, I read this interesting article that was talking about how the roots of the concept of manifest destiny, which is, for people who don't know, it's just this idea that the United States had a God-ordained right to expand and colonize, and also, obviously, this idea is used to justify displacing and killing Native people who lived here, right? And that this idea had its roots in the American Revolution, which was seen as the initial affirmation of God's plan for the United States. And so there's this idea of certain groups or certain people are exceptional. And that goes along with the Ganymede mythology around Aquarius, where it's this exceptional human who goes to live with the gods. And so like the one thing that I really worry about is that this can be something just in general. because Aquarius thinks in such collective terms and sometimes institutional terms, there's a way in which things that are unique and individual and that can't be put into a grouping are denied, which is interesting because often you will also find Aquarians who are just very, very sensitive about that exact issue. And so you'll have some Aquarians that will present as like a punk rocker, for example, super Aquarian, like, you can't peg me, you can't define me, I'm not part of your group, I'm not part of your institution. There's that revolutionary quality. And then at the same time, there will sometimes be this adherence to ideologies or institutions or technologies or ideas that somehow can, almost like mute individuality. And the tension between those two things is such a interesting part of the sign. And it certainly is it's a wonderful sign. I think we have a lot to look forward to. And my favorite thing being that I think there's going to be more receptivity to astrology. I really do. I think Pluto and Aquarius, a lot like we saw with yoga, how there were a couple decades where it just really blew up, at times problematically, because, every other person is now an expert on something that maybe they have no authentic connection with on a spiritual level. It's just, mundane or something. That could be a problem for astrology too. But I do see this as a promising transit for celestial divination, like I think Aquarius,
especially the Saturn, like when Pluto was in Capricorn, there was a period of time where Saturn was also in Capricorn, and that was sort of mean. Saturn doesn't end up back in Aquarius. Okay. So the most we get from Saturn during this is like, sextile, square, trine, but Saturn will be exalted in Libra, trining towards the end of that transit with Pluto and Aquarius. And that feels extremely supportive, because I was worried about that actually, Adam. I was thinking, what about the fear of spirituality and spiritual topics, and like the sort of like maybe a backlash against it, and people holding out from that. But it feels like it actually might be supportive. And then by the time Pluto and Saturn actually conjoin, it will be in Pisces, which is actually a more spiritually conducive sign in a way. So
okay, yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so interesting. We will leave it here because we already talked a little. The last thing we had on the schedule here is Mercury's retrograde in Sagittarius, which we'll just mention quickly here. This is happening on right. I have it on the 25th that it stations and turns retrograde. But, it just depends on how you measure exactly when a retrograde happens. Is it, as it's actually moving at the minute or like some subunit? So either way, it's going to be the 25th, the 26th, the 27th, where you really notice the effects of the retrograde. And then, of course, we're coming into a dark moon at that point in time. And then if you look, you'll see this next new moon is November 30th. This is going to be at 9 degrees of Sagittarius in a pretty tight square with Saturn. This takes us into December's astrology, so we'll look at it next month. But it's interesting to note that Mercury's retrograde will almost instantly take it back through the opposition to Jupiter. And just to kind of fill out what we were saying earlier, Mercury will then station and turn direct about the 17th. And at that point in time, Jupiter and Saturn are almost perfectly square, at which point then Mercury comes back through and participates in the Jupiter-Saturn square. There it is. So it's like, we can't just think of Jupiter.
We're back
Saturn
in mutable hell.
Yeah. We have to think of that square in terms of the whole process of Mercury, which is why looking at Mercury as we did earlier in the month and looking at its whole pattern was important. So we'll be coming back to that in December and sort of unpacking it more, but it's worth tracking Mercury's square to Saturn in opposition to Jupiter this month. Well, we will end on that note because we are out of time and we have gone, I just feel like we went all over the universe today. This was really fun.
No surprise. We talked about Aquarius and Pluto and Aquarius and all the things.
Yeah. Whitney, you can find Whitney at astroarcana.com, where you can book a reading with her. Yay. And then you can also find her on Instagram at astro.arcana.com. whitney.astrology. So I highly recommend following Whitney and getting a reading with her. Alexandra, you can find at 9livesastrology.com, where you can also book a reading with her and work with her to look at these energies and how they're affecting you. And maybe she'll help you craft some interesting rituals or ideas, as she was talking about earlier, for working with the energies. I love that. Instagram for Alexandra is 9livesastrology, and she is going to be having a party where she will be giving away cars to every attendee.
So follow 9 Lives Astrology for more information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pluto send-off party, and Dana, who does the monthly horoscopes, and I are doing a transit tracking workshop for anyone. We just have been getting a lot of questions, like, how do I start tracking transits? So we're going to be doing a workshop, and I'm going to have some other stuff going on. So check it out.
That's Dana Solera, and you can find her if you want to follow her and this talk that they're doing together. You can follow Dana on Instagram at Self-Help Witch. So she is, you guys know her if you watch the horoscopes. She's there every month. So that is it for this month. Remember that in the middle of the month on the 17th, I will be doing that webinar on Pluto and Aquarius. So if you want to come and learn a ton more about Pluto's last transit through Aquarius and how I'm connecting that to things like AI, aliens, and New World Orders, you can come out for that. That'll be fun. And otherwise, make sure you stay in touch with Alexandra and Whitney this month, and we will be back with you all again in December. So until then, have a good one, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.